Have you ever wondered why accountants don't get lost in a forest? It's because we keep track of the timber basis. Hi, I'm Neil Langlois, your guide to navigating the wilderness of tax concepts. Straight from the scenic views at William Neil Langlois CPA. Today we're going to be chopping down the complexities of timber basis and how to track it, and we will also cover how to properly calculate timber depletion. We're going to be making sure you don't get lost in the tax woods. Stick around to learn how to keep your timber taxes trim and your financial forest flourishing. First off, what is timber basis? Let's imagine you just bought a piece of land. A piece of land with a bunch of trees on it. Now imagine there are a bunch of price tags on those trees telling you how much you paid for them and when you bought them. Those price tags added up are your timber basis. When you sell your timber, knowing your timber basis is crucial. It's going to be used to determine how much taxes you owe. Let's say Bob buys a forest for $100,000. The bare land itself is worth about $40,000, leaving the remaining $60,000 for the timber, or our timber basis. Bob's kind of like a kid in a candy store, but with trees? Not sure where I was going with that one. Okay, so Bob has his trees and he has his land. He was a great client because when he bought his trees, he took one very important step of allocating his purchase between the trees, $60,000, and the land, $40,000. Moving on. All right, so a few years later, Bob decides to sell some of his trees for $30,000. To find out his gross profit before other things like logging costs, we are going to need to subtract part of the timber basis from what he made. If the portion of the timber he sold had a basis of, let's say, $15,000, Bob's starting point for profit would be $15,000. $30,000 for the trees minus $15,000 of timber basis equals $15,000. Bob, hey, Bob, hey, Bob.
What's the matter with you?
It isn't that easy to calculate your timber basis. So where did you come up with the $15K in timber basis? That's what I thought. Sure, I'll tell them how to figure it out. Okay, so hopefully you're following along and have a basic understanding of what timber basis is. All right, it's that time in the video. I just wanted to take a minute to plug the channel, Neil CPA. If you're enjoying this video or others on my channel, don't forget to like and subscribe. The support is really encouraging. I would love also to hear any questions you may have down in the comments. Thanks for watching. Now, let's get into calculating timber depletion. So how did Bob figure out how to calculate the basis of the timber he sold? I'm not sure he does actually. I believe he's using the idea known as depletion, which can be calculated by dividing the total timber basis by the total volume of timber just before the logging activity occurs, and multiplying that number you got by the total volume of timber sold. It's like knowing the cost of each chocolate bar in Bob's candy store because of the total cost. Okay, so carry the 3. Nope. I'm not really sure why Bob keeps ending up at the candy store. Okay, so depletion is where you get to deduct a portion of your timber costs based on the amount of timber you logged and sold. The important and really confusing part of this calculation is it isn't based on the timber that was standing when Bob purchased it. So the reason for this is timber is another word for trees. And guess what trees do? They grow, meaning you have more timber. And I mean this quite literally. You have more timber the day after you buy the trees. So you have more timber available when you log. This means your timber basis isn't static. As the trees grow, you end up with more timber. So when looking at your available board feet from day 1 to say year 5, your board feet should have gone up, while your capitalized costs have stayed static. Your cost basis per board foot has gone down over time. It has become diluted. To properly calculate depletion, you need to know the timber or board feet available just before you start logging for that year. To recap our example we have been working with, Bob bought his trees and land for $100,000, and he allocated $40,000 of that to land and $60,000 to the trees. It has been a few years since then. We're going to assume his trees have grown 10% since his purchase. When Bob bought his trees, he had a 100 MBF. With the few years of growth he has had, just before logging, Bob now has 110 MBF available to log. He's had 10% growth. Bob asked the loggers to cut down 25% of his trees and to target about 25 MBF. Bob likes easy math, so he figured if he cuts 25% of his trees, he could figure out that he was able to take 25% of his timber bases. The logger perfectly executed Bob's wishes, however, and actually cut 27.5 MBF and not 25 MBF like Bob had asked them to. So Bob and I were both sort of right. Bob came up with his correct depletion deduction of $15,000, which is 25% of $60,000, but I would say this was by accident. I apologize, Bob, for doubting you. All right, a couple takeaways here. If Bob had cut only 25 MBF, which would have been equal to 25% of the available MBF when he first bought the timber, he wouldn't have been able to take the full 25% timber basis deduction in the form of depletion like he wanted to. It actually would have ended up being more like a 23% deduction. So remember, trees grow. So we only care about the available MBF just before we log, not the MBF when we purchase the trees. Imagine Bob has 25 of these purchases, some of which he doesn't normally log shortly after purchasing them. Imagine that he has logged some of them multiple times over the years. For timber investors, it is so very important to allocate basis to timber when you purchase it, and then keep track of the growth, or at a minimum, estimate growth each year, so that when logging activity happens, they are not forced to scramble to determine the three variables of depletion, which are timber cost, the original timber cost, any additional capitalized costs you have along the way, available MBF prior to logging, and the amount of MBF logged in the current year. Tracking the timber basis means keeping a ledger of every capitalized expense and sale. It's like Bob's diary, but instead of being filled with secrets, it's filled with numbers. Time for a shave, Bob. Every time Bob spends money on improving the forest or sells some timber, he writes it down. And guess what? Sometimes Bob's CPA actually does this for him. This way, he can always tell how much of his timber basis he's used up and how much is left for his crazy candy habits. Sorry, Bob. And remember, folks, unlike trees, the money doesn't actually grow back, so keep a close eye on that timber basis. I would love to hear how you're managing your forest of finances, or if you're planning to start your timber empire. Drop your thoughts or questions in the comments below, and let's keep the conversation growing. Please click subscribe and the like buttons while you're at it. Today, we ventured through the forest of timber basis and depletion. From what it is to tracking it like a true financial forester. Keeping track of your timber basis ensures you only pay taxes on your real profits, keeping your wallet as green as your forest. Remember, for more tips on navigating the tax wilderness, visit our website at www.neil.tax or shoot us an email at info@neil.tax, or stay tuned right here on Neil CPA. Until next time, keep your axes sharp and your numbers sharper.